Alisyn, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Alisyn and I have known each other for a few years now. We spent some time working together when she was with May Mobility, an autonomous vehicle company that's actually doing autonomous vehicles, which I think is so cool. And now she's off doing some more fun stuff in the autonomy world. Alisyn, what are you up to these days?
So now I've transitioned from the startup world to the policy world, and I'm the executive director for the Commission on the Future of Mobility. So working beyond just autonomy, really looking at how policy drives outcomes for us in terms of transportation and trying to help rethink it. So a lot of transportation policy got set 70 plus years ago. And so trying to really rethink how, everything from how we use roads and bridges to how autonomous vehicles can fit into our transportation systems of the future, and trying to look at that at a global scale.
Wow. 70 years ago, and now here we are, right? Autonomous vehicles weren't even an idea 70 years ago. They probably weren't even an idea for 40 years ago. I don't know. So what does that look like? How do you make that huge of a shift?
So part of it is being practical about the jobs to be done. The technology is really exciting, but at the end of the day with transportation, it underpins so much in our lives. How we get to school, how we get to work, all of those types of things. But it is also how we get our food. It's how we get our medicine. And so when you kind of switch from the view of how cool technology is and look at what can we achieve with it, it makes it easier to be thoughtful, because sometimes the solution isn't actually more technology, it's more people-centric thinking. So even when I was at May Mobility, I would talk with cities about how they could prepare for autonomous vehicles. And oftentimes they wanted, I think, to hear something, very exciting and got to have this new technology. And they would be somewhat disappointed when I would tell them that improved sidewalk access and bike lanes would be great. It gives every people their space to be safe and to get around safely. And that makes it a lot easier for new technology like an autonomous vehicle to operate safely in a community. But that's some pretty old school approaches that, when you're thinking about new technology, it doesn't always come up as oh yeah, let's go back to the basics. But sometimes that's what we need.
Yeah, you can't go straight from, here we are in 2020 to the Jetsons and have flying vehicles, right, that are autonomous. You gotta take some intermediate steps, but steps that make a ton of sense and provide a lot of value to people. You said, not just getting us around, but actually delivering food, delivering medicine. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and my wife and I have been using lots of services for that very thing. I'm curious, what is the future of that you see?
Oh man, I think so. I would say up until the pandemic, people, the general public, was way more interested in how we as individuals move. So they're, especially for me coming out of the startup space, there's scooters and rideshare and autonomous vehicles. But what's been really exciting, honestly, is the shift to appreciating supply chains and how things actually come to us and where the things that we're using come from. My husband actually jokes, because I have talked about supply chains for a long time, kind of nerdily bringing them up in conversation. And my husband at the beginning of the pandemic started to joke that people were starting to catch on to that weird nerdy stuff I'd be talking about. So what's exciting is now, instead of just people that work in the freight and goods transportation space thinking about how we get our things, it's moved into the mind of the general population, either because we couldn't get toilet paper, or we're really excited that we can have things delivered straight to our home. And that makes it much easier to have interesting conversations, like what should the future of the home delivery system look like? Should it be box vans? Should it be smaller robotic vehicles that maybe go a little bit slower, but there's more warehouses around so things can still get to you quickly? And those types of shifts do a lot in terms of, what people can access. So if more people can use home delivery, can we also reduce the number of food deserts that exist? Because we can use mobility to bring access instead of trying to worry about land use development. I think from a workforce perspective, the number of warehouses that are popping up to serve this further demand for delivery is going to be really interesting. Like, what is the future of our workforce, especially as it's distributed? And so what's exciting to me is how much now this is in the general conversation.
Yeah. It's no longer the nerds. It's everybody. We all think we know what we're talking about. As you were talking, I was like, wow, that's fascinating. You think about food deserts. I spent close to 20 years in Detroit in the school systems there. And that was very much a challenge that we had for the students that we were serving, is a lot of them didn't have access to good grocery stores, which means they didn't have access to great produce and vegetables and fruit, and boom, just like that, you could solve that, not overnight, obviously, but the future you're speaking to is exactly that we no longer need a grocery store down the street in order to provide fruits and vegetables to kids that don't have access to it down the street. That's an amazing thought. I love that.
Then it opens up the can of worms about having digital access. That, I think, has become even more important. And I'm frankly a little bit surprised that there hasn't been more like out in your face conversation about the digital divide. So both for rural areas and for urban areas, a lot of times people don't have access to broadband. Not everybody has smartphones. In the city of Detroit, something like over 40% of people do not have smartphones. So how can you, so then if we're going to go to this distributed model, we need to think about the next part of that, making sure that people have some sort of means for digital payment, and making sure that they have some sort of means for actually ordering it. So it's exciting, but it still touches on really big challenges that exist either way. But it's good because it brings it to the fore. Like, we have a solution, and maybe that can help drive this discussion between that and access to school when schools are closed. That can drive the discussion around making sure everybody has access to broadband.
Well, and it makes me think about, the whole implication now on the government and the food stamps and sort of providing services like that. And how do you tie those systems together so that, you've got a link between the two, so that we know the money's going towards, healthy food, for instance. And it's all sort of seamlessly tied together. That's a lot of fun. Is that the sort of thing that you're working on policy wise? Like, give us a sense for what you're tackling.
So those are the types of things that I think about personally. Policy wise for the commission, our work is going to be a little bit more solely focused on transportation. So thinking about infrastructure, the future of our roads, how are we going to pay for that? As digital infrastructure and transportation becomes more important, how does that get added in? Does that get coupled with usage type policies and frankly taxation? Does that need to be tied together or not? So when you think about things like toll roads or congestion pricing, trying to rethink, what does that built environment look like? Also trying to just look at another area that we're interested in is this future of freight. What does it mean for our ports? What does it mean for our highways? As we have so many more goods being delivered to homes, it really upends how the existing freight ecosystem was set up, which was much more get things to the store and then people become that last mile. So right now, FedEx, like, the joke is every day is like Christmas. Every day is like the holiday season because so much stuff is moving.
Yeah.
And that has implications for our highways in terms of congestion, but also neighborhoods. If you live in a denser neighborhood and you know where there's parking on the street, But you need FedEx trucks to get through, and you need UPS trucks to get through, and you need your ship drivers to be able to park, and your Uber Eats drivers to be able to park. Like, how do we actually figure out how to manage that curb space? And looking to, like, for ports, for instance, where you've got big ships coming in, they have a lot of emissions, and then you usually have lots of big trucks coming to get the cargo containers off the ships that have a lot of emissions. The communities around those ports generally have really bad air quality, which has huge implications for, like, how long people in those zip codes will live. And so from that perspective, also thinking about how do we consider the national need for goods to move and the impact on the local communities that need to host that kind of commerce, and how do we balance out sort of the weight that different communities hold.
That's so funny, because literally yesterday I went for lunch with my wife. It was her birthday, and we were coming back, and literally a UPS truck pulled around a FedEx truck and right in front of it, going the wrong way, and stopped and parked. And I had to, like, squeeze by both of these. And then as I turned the corner, there's an Amazon truck coming, and it was exactly that moment of, like, wow, it is like Christmas, and it's November, right? Like, it's early November, and yet it's a great way to put it, that this is a whole different world that we're living in. It's not, and not just because of the pandemic, although that's accelerated it, I'm sure, but that is sort of the future we're living into. Wow. So how do you think about, obviously we love to talk about culture, we love to talk about leadership. How do you think about leadership when it comes to this role that you're in now for, a few months in, right?
Yep, I'm a few months in. I'm still a team of one, but getting in interview process to bring on my policy director. But there's sort of, what's interesting about the role that I have now is that there's leadership in sort of two dimensions. There's going to be the leadership of my team and stewardship of their work, and helping us to achieve the vision of the commission. But I also have commissioners, which are sort of like my board members, and they are all leaders in their own right. And so part of the work that we're doing is trying to bring them together and create a safe space where they can share together the insights that they have and lead together. And what's to me, I'm excited to try out. We haven't brought everybody together yet, but it's going to be a different conversation than most of them have had, because it's not just car makers. It's not just people that work in package delivery or moving people. It's all of these leaders from all of these types of sectors coming together, and trying to be thoughtful about what is the future that we all want to create together. So we also get to do some visioning, which I think is going to be pretty unique, to be able to work with such thoughtful and experienced people and try to channel that. So I'm also excited about that challenge. So
what is it? If you were to, if there's a young leader out there, right, who's loves your sort of your journey through this engineering world, and is following you, what would you say to them? What is leadership to you?
Leadership to me, it's funny because I feel like I'm just going to regurgitate what we've talked about, but it definitely fits. Leadership for me is being able to set a vision of something that you can accomplish, either yourself when you're a leader of a team of one, or something that the team can pull together and do, and then helping people see how they can participate to get there. And so it's an exciting position in that you can see a future. You're like, oh my goodness, this thing needs to happen, which is really exciting. But the other really important part is everybody that's coming together to help make that a reality. You're also like a shepherd for all of those people. You need to help them be able to see, where are we going? What are we trying to do? And when they're having challenges, make sure that you can help them stay on course. And that can be indirect. So even when I was an early engineer, I was just a project lead. I was quite young. I was told that my project was going to get taken away because I didn't have quite enough experience, but nobody wanted to take it from me. So it was too much of a pain. But I had a ton of fun. It was to develop a new charging system. So a new technology. We were setting standards. We were trying to integrate our parts into car designs that were being set in 3 different countries, so multiple time zones. And it was a really crazy project. But I just knew that, like, for this car, it was an electric vehicle. It needed to have a higher capacity charging. I just knew it, like, from a customer perspective. And so just kind of kept that little kernel and kept it and kept pushing it forward and talking with people about it. And it was really exciting. I didn't have any direct reports, but it was really exciting to see so many team members start to appreciate that vision and buy in. And at the end of the day, I had probably 30 people across software and hardware working on this technology, where I was kind of setting the vision and shepherding it through. I wasn't a manager. So for early stage people, that's in their career, that's often like, oh, I need to get to the point where I'm, managing people. That's not always the case. You can still lead, even when there aren't people that work directly for you, and you can still set a compelling vision that people buy into.
Yeah, such an awesome story, such an awesome example too of just that leadership doesn't require a position, doesn't require authority even, that you can lead, as you just said, you could lead a team of 30 people without any badge, without really anything special on your badge or on your business card. That leadership is all about that future. It's all about that vision. It's all about, as you talked about it, I could see the excitement coming out of you, and that by itself is compelling. It's attractive to other people, which is at the heart of really good leadership. It's a great example of that. And my guess is you're going to be, using that same skill as you go forward, because a lot of these folks that you're going to be trying to influence aren't going to report to you, right? So you don't have command and control. You've got the power of a future. You got the power of a vision to enroll people in and get them all rowing in the same direction.
Yes, and I'm still going to be the youngest, technically least experienced person in the room. So that it really does come back to having that vision. And I think the reason that I feel the confidence that I can do it is that I have given myself a lot of different experiences through my career. So I've taken lots of right and left turns where people are like, why would you do that? Why are you going to ventures? You're on management track and engineering. Why are you leaving GM to go to a startup? That seems silly. But that's allowed me to have a really diverse perspective, still focused in the mobility space. So I still have an area where I have expertise. But that diversity is something that not everybody gets to have. And that is what I think I get to bring to the table. And so sometimes I know it can be overwhelming for people when they're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be in a room of CEOs. And I think I will still get overwhelmed in February when I'm in that virtual room. But the self-talk that I give to myself is just recognizing that I bring a valuable perspective, not that I have to come up with whatever we're going to say. I'm much more of a facilitator in that role. But there's still a vision of diversity that I've been exposed to that I think will be able to help bring those voices, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's and you'll have to keep fighting those little voices off, by the way, because they will keep showing up throughout your life, is my experience. And we have to choose to listen to the voice over here, the little devil, or the angel over here that's encouraging us on and saying, you got this. So I happen to know that you're quite passionate about a lot of things. One of them being, helping women in positions of leadership. Talk a little bit about that and why that's important to you.
Yeah, so it's funny. When I was in engineering school, there were groups like the Society for Women Engineers and things like that. Generally, there were like 10% women in my mechanical engineering class. So I was very used to working with men. It didn't bother me. I was a bit of a tomboy growing up, so it didn't feel like a weird fit. But then as I got into my professional work and started to come up against some of the disparities in how women's traits are just frankly approach differently than men's traits sometimes, it made me appreciate having female mentors. So as I'm trying to process what's happening in front of me and whether or not I should take that feedback or kind of take that guidance or that just didn't feel true to my core, it was really helpful to have somebody be like, nope, that probably, that's that person's view of the world. You don't have to take that one on yourself. And I think for women and people that are in a minority in general, there's going to be the dominant culture wherever you are. And if you are a little bit different than that dominant culture, it starts to get weird when you're like, oh, am I the one that's thinking about this, differently? And then it starts to feel like, is that wrong? And being able to start to feel comfortable and identify it and not feel like you have to get sucked into it, I think is really important. And so that's why I'm really passionate about being able to help elevate other leaders. I'm a woman, so from that perspective, that's a space where I feel like I can speak to other people, other women's experience as they're trying to come up in their own careers. So that's where I focused a lot of time and energy. But to give one example that's very specific and still I laugh about now, I was working for an executive running a staff meeting. And it would usually run over about 30 minutes. It was an hour meeting, run over about 30 minutes. You'd have, people who spent 2 weeks preparing a presentation to bring it into the staff meeting to get feedback, get the decision that they need. This is like a big thing in their career. And sometimes we just wouldn't even cover those topics. And I think that's kind of common in older organizations, like, oh, didn't get to it this week, we'll cover it next time. And that just seemed so frustrating to me for the people that were trying to be prepared. They were ready, and it was just a mismanagement of time. And so I started reminding people, we've got 15 minutes for this topic on the agenda. We got 5 minutes left. All right, that topic's done. Are we done discussing? And just trying to keep things running on time to be respectful. And I was told that I was too abrasive and that I made so I was a low person on the totem pole, and I was making directors feel uncomfortable. I was like a 26-year-old female. Like, come on, if you can't handle being told you're running over on a meeting, like there are bigger problems. But I was young, and I'm sitting there like I'm abrasive for trying to be, keep things running on time. Like it just didn't add up. But it was nice to be able to have perspective from some other people of just like, the fact that you're clear in your communication about this makes people uncomfortable sometimes. And that for me was sort of a really pivotal moment when I started to appreciate why it's helpful to be able to have mentors. So then that way, when you're in those situations and you're like, it just doesn't add up, I don't understand why I'm getting this feedback, they can help to give you a different perspective and see, are you just going against the dominant culture? And so maybe it's not you. And then figure out which feedback you want to take and which you want to ignore.
So much in that story, so many lessons. The one that stands out to me is this. Somebody said, you're making people uncomfortable. Well, that's a leadership lesson by itself. The leaders aren't committed to people's comfort necessarily. They're committed to people's growth. They're committed to the organization's growth. In this case, we're committed to the team's growth. We need to operate in a more effective and more efficient way. And yeah, that may make some people uncomfortable, but I'm okay with that because what we're doing isn't working. And leaders don't accept the reality that as it is. They keep pushing, they keep challenging, they keep trying to find new and better ways to do things. Which is easy to say. And as you said at the very beginning of the story, I laugh now in retrospect, but in the moment, not so funny, not so easy to deal with. And so for young leaders out there, young female leaders in particular, what advice do you have for them?
If somebody calls you abrasive, it's not career suicide. So I think that's the biggest thing for me in that moment. The position I was in as a technical assistant to an executive is like, it's a little bit of a position in the organization that I was in that was like being on a pedestal. Like you are management track. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm messing it up so bad. So bad. And I messed up many things so bad because I really didn't agree with the leadership approach that was being taken. But when I look back at sticking to my true value, I have been able to have much more impact than I would have if I had listened to that leader. So as I was transitioning out of that position, the feedback that I got was that I still needed more development time, which isn't necessarily wrong. I was young, I was still green. There were still, some edges to be molded, but that I needed to go essentially do a position I had already done before. And if you're in an engineering organization, there's usually sort of like boxes you check. I did that job. I shouldn't need to do it again. I needed to do it again. And from that point, in about 5 years, I would be ready for management and becoming a leader in the organization. And if we had stuck to that timeline, when I co-founded a company, I would have been ready to be a manager, which is just bonkers if I had listened to that feedback. And so in the moment, it felt really frustrating and really scary, but I just pivoted. I said, okay, I was very passionate about electrification and helping see that through for the world, and ended up leaving that space. I stayed within the organization. I went over into a different space in electronics and then moved into corporate venture. But just was like, okay, I thought that was going to be who I was and how I was going to be. And I had started to adopt part of that as my personal identity. But just said, okay, I'm going to set that one aside. I'm curious about startups, moved into venture, started working in the autonomous space, the mobility space, still working on electrification, co-founded, and grew a company working in electric autonomous transportation. And what's hilarious is now I'm back working on electrification in a much more impactful way than I would if I was just an individual engineer. I'm at a point where I have a much bigger lever, which is really exciting and something I never would have predicted when it hurt really hard or really bad to set that, what I thought set that part of myself aside, only to come back to it 6 years later.
Yeah, it's the age-old wisdom, right? Of listen to your gut, listen to your own intuition. Don't listen to those negative voices out there. It doesn't mean you don't listen to them, doesn't mean you don't incorporate them and to consider them. But not everything you get from your boss or from the team around you is gold. To listen to it, let it in, make sure you understand it, but then consider it and say, how does this apply to me? Do I want to listen to this? Do I not want to listen to this? How does this impact my future? And a lot of times we've got to shake it off and not let our amygdala, not let our monkey brain, if you will, get triggered and shut us down, which is unfortunately what a lot of people do. I think is a lot of folks in that situation would have said, oh, I guess I just won't speak up anymore, and we'll go back to having meetings that run a half hour late, and I'll just sort of go along to get along. So a great lesson. So as you think about your sort of things that you're most proud of over your tenure so far, and I know you're still quite young, but what stands out to you? What are you most proud of?
Oh, so honestly, that engineering project I talked about before, the fast charging, that was a crazy project, pulling people together globally to get it done on a shortened timeline. Like the vehicle wouldn't launch if we didn't have it ready. That was so much fun. I had, zero formal leadership position, but it was so much fun. And I got to have such a breadth of exposure that it's still one of the most favorite things that I've done. I really enjoyed working in venture to learn the startup space. And so I kind of approach my career and the things that I do of like, what do I want to go learn next? So I saw that as a way to kind of learn about the startup space, and then the work that we were able to do with May Mobility in truly changing the conversation around how autonomous vehicles could be used in transportation. That was really powerful. Before we launched, most companies were talking about using autonomous technology in terms of rideshare, point to point. And if you look at a lot of the history in large cities, rideshare like Uber and Lyft have actually added congestion, made driving in cities worse, not better, reduced increase the amount of time it takes to get anywhere. And you still have to have a smartphone. So they're still cutting a lot of people out. There's places that drivers won't pick up. There's places that drivers won't. So there's a lot of challenges on that total access side that I felt like the work that we did at May Mobility got to challenge that premise and actually say, no, I think we can go out and work directly with communities to help them solve their challenges instead of sort of forcing something onto them. And that and just the experience of growing a team was also a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, a lot of heartache, a lot of challenge, but also the joy. Like I still catch up with some of my old team members. We'll do mentoring calls and stuff like that. And just having gotten to create that opportunity as well for so many other people was really, really rewarding.
Yeah, you can't have fun unless you're working hard, in my opinion, and it's not supposed to be easy. Leadership, in particular, is not supposed to be easy, but it should be rewarding. It should be a lot of fun if you're doing it well and you've got the right team and you're having fun along the way. So one more question for you that I like to ask, which is, one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves, we can give others, is the gift of learning, of growing and constantly improving. So what book would you recommend that maybe really impacted your life professionally or personally?
So I've been reading a lot and I'm trying to think if I have any updates to that, but it's been mostly books for work, which have been impactful, but probably not for a broader audience. I think I would still come back to the mindset book that we read. And I know I gave this answer last time. But for me, I'm the type of person that I can change and I can grow, and I do it best when I understand why. Mm-hmm. And the mindset book, paired with the smaller book that we read on brains and brain chemistry, really helped me understand why. So it makes it much easier to make those changes, to slow down, take the deep breath, because I understood why. I actually just read another book called Why We Sleep. I like sleeping, but I used to be the type of person where I'd be like, oh, I got to get a couple more emails out, go to bed 11:30 midnight, get up at 6. And it wasn't great for my health, but I didn't understand the long-term implications. And so after reading that book, I was like, oh, I understand why now. So I've been prioritizing my sleep more. But for me, it's books that help me understand why. And I realize that's not for everybody's brain, but for those of you out there where that's how your brain works, Mindset is a good book. And I'd say Why We Sleep is a good number 2.
Yeah, Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck, and then Why We Sleep. Do you know who that's by?
Nope, but I can search it out.
Everyone has Google these days. Yeah, it's a great topic, by the way, I think, for leaders, because intellectually that we're supposed to put our face mask on first, right? We can't help others unless we take care of ourselves. And sleep, exercise, diet, it's all the basic fundamental building blocks that we sort of ignore, a lot of us. And we tend to put others first. But the reality is we can't serve others and we can't serve powerfully unless we've got a powerful battery, unless we've filled ourselves up and we've taken care of ourselves. And so it's a great reminder for all of us that if you're not getting the sleep you need, you're not a hero. You're not amazing. You're not that cool. You're cutting yourself short from what you could be doing. So a great reminder for all of us. Well, awesome.
The book is by Matthew Walker, and I just want to double down on that. Sleep improves your ability to respond appropriately in emotional situations, and it also reduces likelihood for long-term diseases that could actually take you out of your leadership game from your organization. Things like strokes and Alzheimer's.
Take you out of this world.
Yeah.
It's no joke. Awesome. Well, thanks for the time, Alisyn. It's great talking to you. I know you're up north at your cottage in northern Michigan. Here I am in a new location in front of pictures of my kids. This is the mobile and global podcast, and we just thank you for spending some time with us.
Absolutely. It was great to catch up, Tom.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.